Okay, so we're working on parts 1 and 2 today. The homework for tonight is over part 0. And before I forget, our very last discussion, the first post, is due on, oh, apparently, why can't I count? Sunday. So don't forget about that guy. Okay, so now what I want to do first before we talk about the new module materials is go over the notes I emailed out this morning and talk about what's going on in part 0. So let me open those real quick. There we go. Okay, so part 0 has to do with a concept called matrix multiplication. And first of all, if you don't know what a matrix is, it's essentially just a grid of numbers. And matrix multiplication is a way of combining two of these matrices and getting a. It's related to how we normally think of multiplication, but it's not quite as simple as it first looks. And first thing I want to talk about is that the way matrix multiplication works is that we're essentially combining rows from the left matrix with columns from the right matrix. Now, the most common mistake people do, they think is, oh, I'll just take the top left number of each of these, multiply them together to get the top left number of the answer. As you can see, that clearly didn't work. What actually happens is what I was trying to mention before, is where we combine entire rows with entire columns. And the way we do that is essentially a sum product. So we pair up the first number from each, we pair up the second number from each, we multiply those pairs and we add them together. So 1 times 1 plus 4 times 2 looks like that, and we get 9. So this entire row, an entire column, gives us one number. And then we have to do that process for every single row and column combination will give us another one of these numbers. So you'd have to do it 12 times in this example. So matrix multiplication takes a very long time if you're doing it by hand, which is why I want to go over an example of how to do this efficiently in Excel, because it will be a major part of this module, not so much today, but when we get further into it. So before I show you how we type this into Excel, I want to point out that because these rows and columns have different orientation, one's going left, right, one's going up and down, you can't just use the sum product function, even though it is essentially a sum product. So we can't use that, so we need something new. And it also means that order matters, because we're taking rows from the left guy and columns from the right guy. If you sort of switch that, you get completely different math. And so multiplication with matrices is not commutative. AB can be different than B times A. So anyway, just be careful of the order. Okay, so how do we do this in Excel? Well, thankfully, there is a function that does it for us. It is called mmult, which stands for matrix multiplication. And it's not too bad to use. We just go into this top left cell, and you want to make sure you have enough space, because the answer is going to have the same amount of rows from the first guy and same amount of columns from the second guy. So I made sure I have, 3 rows by 4 columns of space. We type equals mmult, and it asks us to put in 2 arrays, essentially the 2 matrices. So I highlight the first one, comma, highlight the second one, and I hit enter, and there's my answer. So that's how we do matrix multiplication in Excel. It's not too bad. It's way faster than trying to do it by hand. Now, if that previous method doesn't work, because that what I did technically is a newer aspect of Excel, so like if you don't have the newest version, here's an example of how to do it the old way, but I'm going to skip that for now if you would like me to go through it, because this quick way doesn't work, just let me know. I'll walk through an example. So that is matrix multiplication. And now I want to move over to the actual materials that we are looking at in this module. Module 10 is called Sales at a Sandwich Shop. And essentially, we're running a shop that primarily sells sandwiches, but they also sell like drinks and chips and all sorts of other sides. And we're looking at things like receipts to see what items were popular. We're looking at eventually our inventory to see how much we need to order so we have enough things on hand to actually make our sandwiches, that kind of stuff. And our spreadsheet looks like this. So we have 3 tabs here. The first one is a bunch of sales for the month of July. There's like 10,000 rows. And it tells us the date we made the sale, the product type and how much we sold it for. So we have all hundreds of receipts for every day of this month, and we want to analyze this. And we're going to analyze this in a way we've actually done before quite a bit. We're going to like count how many lemonades you've sold or add up all the receipts for a particular day. But we are not going to use our old functions. You are welcome to. I am going to show a new method that most people prefer when they have both of them side by side. Then the other 2 tabs we will get to eventually, but not so much today. Okay, so how are we going to attack these questions if we're not going to be using our usual countifs and average ifs and sum ifs and all that stuff? Well, we're going to be using what's called a pivot table. And so the first thing I need to show you is how to actually insert a pivot table into your spreadsheet. So if you click anywhere in here and you go to the Insert tab and this top left button which says Pivot Table, if you click that, as you can see now the entire thing is highlighted, which is nice. It tells me it's going to put it on a new worksheet, which I always do, but technically you could put it on this tab if you want. I hit OK, and I get this, a weird little picture on the left, a weird set of buttons and windows on the right. And essentially how a pivot table works is it's just a bunch of drag and drop. Our goal is to not have to type a single function, and just by dragging things around to the appropriate spots, Excel does everything for us. For example, let's say I want to see all the products that we sell at the store. I go up here to these 5 things which correspond to the headers of the 5 columns from the raw data, and I drag it down to like this rows area. And if I let go, it not only populates it with all the unique entries, it also sorts it for me, which is really nice. Okay, let's say I don't want products, I want to get rid of it. I can select this and drag it off. I could just click this check mark up here. Either way, it makes it go away. Maybe I want all the dates involved, so I could drag dates down there. And again, populates it just like I want. You could also use the columns area of this section, and then it puts those labels across the top, which is nice. What else can we do? This bottom right area is when we want to do like actual math. So let's say I want to look at the receipts on those days. The receipts, or like the prices specifically, how much money I sold these things for. If I drag that down to the values area, it does that. It calculates in this case, the sum of all those receipts on a given day. Essentially, I just did 31 separate sum ifs without typing a single function. It just did it automatically. Super nice. What else do I want to talk about? Oh, try not to do work over here. Work. Because the way pivot tables work is they're constantly dynamically growing. So like, let's say I put this over here or something. It's going to say, hey, there's data over here. Are you sure? And I say, yeah, who cares? Well, now that work that used to be there just got swallowed by the pivot table, and it's essentially gone. So try not to do that. That's why I only have the pivot table on this tab, and I try to do other work elsewhere. Let's try the first question in the book. What do we got here? I actually think I already did that one. But the first question in part 1 says, what is the total revenue on July 8th. And so when you're using a pivot table, the first thing you want to do is identify which of those like 5 columns the question is asking about. And so, for example, I see a specific date, so we know dates are involved. It's asking about revenue, so I know price is going to be involved. I don't see any product names, I can ignore that. I don't see anything else. I just need revenue and dates. So we know that we need to drag these things somewhere. I like to put dates along the rows for this particular example. Revenue would be when we're adding up these prices. And there we go. There's the answer for July 8th. It's right there, which is really nice. What else? Oh, you might have noticed sometimes my buttons on the right disappear. If they ever disappear, usually you just have to click back over here on the left and they'll pop back up. But if they don't, you'll notice I have these 2 new tabs along the top. If we click on this Analyze one, there's a button way on the far right called Field List. And if I click that, now it's sort of permanently gone. So if yours ever disappears, click on that Field List button and it'll come back so you can actually manipulate your pivot table. Okay, let's say I want to make a graph. You could technically make a graph here, but remember, I don't like to actually do work here because it can mess up your pivot table because your pivot table wants to grow sideways sometimes. So what I like to do is highlight all of these white numbers and copy them. And let's go back to the original tab and just paste it there. And now you can just make a graph over here. And these numbers, they're just numbers, right? I just pasted the values. It's not a pivot table. So like me changing this pivot table won't magically make that graph disappear. So that's how I like to attack those questions to sort of save my work. Okay, what else can we do with a pivot table? Oh, you might have noticed that it summed all these prices. It even says sum right there and in the bottom. So it did a bunch of sum ifs essentially. That's the default value because in our raw data, we had numbers. And so it thinks, oh, you'd like to sum these numbers. What if I wanted to count these numbers and just say, okay, that's 1 thing sold, 2, 3, 4, etc. I don't want to sum those things. I want to count them. Well, the way you can change this function is you go down here where it says sum of price, and there's a little arrow next to it. And if you click that arrow, there's a settings button. And if we click that, we can pick which function and a couple other options we're utilizing. So if I click on count, it'll now have the count of all those receipts. That's 31 separate count ifs without doing a whole lot of work. Another thing you could have done is instead of having price down here in this little computational area, let's say I use this column. Well, I can't sum these. These are words. So it's actually going to default to count. And so I don't have to do that extra step. So if I know I want a count, I can just use like product instead. And there we go. Same numbers. So that's a nice way that you can change the calculations that are occurring inside your pivot table. What else? Let's say I want to talk about all the products. So I put the products in the rows so I can see them all. And I want to eventually do some calculations. But I also want to know what product type there are, what category these things come from. Well, you can actually drag multiple things down in this rows area, and then it'll update the pivot table accordingly. So like apple pie is a dessert, potato chips is a side, and so on. This is okay, but it'd be nice if it like grouped all the desserts and grouped all the sides. And you can do that if I change the order of these buttons down here. If I instead drag product underneath product type, then product type is first. So here's my desserts, here's my drinks, and so on. And it organizes all this stuff for us, which is super nice. You could also drag a third thing down there. And now I also have dates over here. But as far as I'm concerned, this is horrible to look at. I would never put 3 things in here. So instead, if I put date in this column area, we get a pretty solid table. We get dates along the top. We get these nice labels along the side. I can put whatever I want in the middle, and that table is super complicated. And it took me all of 10 seconds to build just by dragging it and type a single thing. which is super nice. What else? Oh, let's say I don't want to look at the entire month because maybe the workbook says for a specific week. Well, notice these little arrow buttons here. It's just like filters from before, earlier in the semester. You can click that and I can say, hey, I only want to look at these 3 dates. And now it filters, and it's easier to find, the grand total of those 3 dates instead of having to scroll over and, manually add these up yourself, which is kind of nice. You can also use those buttons to sort. So let's say I have this table. I got rid of the product types. And right now, the left column is alphabetized. It's going A to Z. But what if I want to look at column B and know what made the most money that day? So I want to sort column B. I click any number in column B, and I go to this sort and filter button on the home tab and go largest to smallest. Did I just miss? Oh, no, it's sorted. And apparently roast beef made 80 bucks and turkey clubs tied. It also made, did I say 90 bucks, and so on. But now this isn't alphabetized. Like they both can't be sorted at the same time. So you can only sort one column at once. So if you want to go back, click a value in column A and resort, whoops, just one. Resort this guy, A to Z, and now it's back to alphabetized order. One last thing. Let's say we are making this graph, and I don't want to know the values. I want to know what percent of everything, like July 1st made up what percent of all the receipts. So like 232 out of 10,000. I want those percents to show up. There is technically a way to make these numbers percents, but let's say you can't figure it out. Well, just like graphs, what I would advise doing is copy this data, and technically I've already done this, but let's say you didn't have that, paste it somewhere, and then just do the calculations yourself. So total is the sum of those guys. And now my percents would be 232 out of that guy. And there's a percent. And if I lock that, there's all the other percents. And so we can use these 2 columns from the pivot table and then just tack on a little extra calculation of our own. So if you can't figure out how to make something appear like this in the pivot table, that's how I would advise going about doing it. Just copy the numbers you want and then add on to them as necessary.